Arrogant rookie officer challenges a black judge's authority. What happens next stuns everyone. Every Thursday at 12:30 p.m., Darnell Washington stood outside Morris Convenience on Marshall and 4th, waiting for his sister Michelle to finish her shift at the nearby dental clinic. It was their weekly ritual, a peaceful lunch break in the middle of their busy lives. A police cruiser pulled up with a quick jerk, wheels spitting dust against the curb. Officer Savannah Mitchell stepped out, her boots clicking with mechanical certainty. Her eyes locked on Darnell. Her posture screamed authority, but her gaze carried something colder, like she'd already made up her mind. "Sir," she called, hand resting near her belt, "I need to see some identification." Darnell looked up, confused but polite. "Excuse me? There's been a report of suspicious activity in the area. I need to see your ID." Her tone was clipped, rehearsed, and unyielding. Suspicious activity? Here? Darnell hesitated, then reached into his back pocket slowly, deliberately. "Sure," he said calmly, "but I'm just waiting for my sister. She works right there." He gestured to the dental clinic. "We meet here every Thursday." "I didn't ask for your schedule," Savannah snapped, taking a step closer. "I asked for your ID." Darnell handed over his license, offering a small, peacekeeping smile. "Everything okay, officer?" But she wasn't listening. Her eyes were scanning the ID like it held a hidden threat. Then, without warning, she lifted her radio. "Unit 247 requesting backup. Possible non-compliant subject. Standing by." Darnell blinked. "Wait, non-compliant? I gave you my ID." She didn't respond. Instead, she ordered, "Step away from the storefront." "I'm not even," he began, but she was already advancing. "Hands where I can see them." "What?" Darnell's voice rose slightly. "I'm cooperating." People on the sidewalk started to slow down. Some stopped. A few instinctively pulled out their phones. Something didn't feel right. The man wasn't yelling. He wasn't resisting. He looked confused. And the officer's tone? It was escalating faster than the situation demanded. "I'm telling you again," Savannah barked, now inches away. "Hands where I can see them, or I will detain you." Darnell raised his hands, stunned. "I'm not doing anything. I'm literally just waiting for someone." Behind the clinic window, Michelle had just clocked out. She spotted the flashing patrol lights through the blinds, then saw the unmistakable silhouette of her brother standing frozen, hands raised. Panic surged through her. She sprinted out the side door, but it was too late. In one swift motion, Savannah turned Darnell around and shoved him against the brick wall. The slap of metal echoed as she snapped handcuffs around his wrists. "You're being detained for suspicious behavior and potential resistance." "What?" Darnell shouted. "This is insane. I did nothing." "Back away," Savannah barked at a bystander who stepped too close with a camera phone. "Do not interfere with an active arrest." Michelle reached the scene just as Darnell was being pulled toward the cruiser. "That's my brother," she screamed. "What are you doing? He didn't do anything. We meet here every week." But Savannah didn't acknowledge her. Darnell was shoved into the back seat of the cruiser. The door slammed with a brutal finality. His face was pale, lips parted, eyes flicking from stranger to stranger, silently begging someone to explain what had just happened. He looked like a man who'd stepped into a nightmare. No aggression, no resistance, just raw, stunned confusion. The crowd had grown now 10, maybe 15 people. Several were recording. One woman shouted, "He didn't do anything. You can't just arrest someone for standing." Michelle pounded her fists on the window. "Darnell, I'm calling a lawyer. Hang on." But Darnell barely heard her. The cruiser began pulling away. And in that moment, something cracked in the air. Something invisible, but heavy. The kind of crack that splits belief systems, that breaks illusions of safety. Darnell, a man who paid taxes, obeyed laws, wore button-downs, and kept receipts, had just learned a cruel truth. Sometimes none of it matters, because to Officer Savannah Mitchell, he hadn't looked like a brother waiting for lunch. He looked like a threat, and that, in her eyes, was enough. While Darnell sat in a holding cell trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong, back at the precinct, Officer Savannah Mitchell was already rewriting the truth one keystroke at a time. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Officer Savannah Mitchell sat behind her desk in the precinct's cramped report room. her fingers dancing over the keyboard with clinical precision. Her uniform was spotless, her posture upright, her face unreadable except for the faint smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. The memory of the arrest still played fresh in her mind like a highlight reel. The man's stunned expression, his stammering protests, the gleam of the cuffs as they clicked shut. She didn't see an innocent man being humiliated. She saw a win. Her first solo arrest, neatly executed and easily justified with the right narrative. She began typing the report with confidence, choosing her words carefully. Subject appeared agitated, failed to comply with verbal commands, reached into pocket despite instruction to remain still. Subject resisted detainment and displayed erratic behavior. Officer responded with necessary force to ensure public safety. She leaned back for a moment, reading over the paragraph, and smiled. It was polished, procedural, perfectly within the bounds of department protocol. A lie, yes, but a convincing one. She didn't mention that Darnell had calmly offered his ID. She didn't mention the video cameras or the crowd. She certainly didn't mention Michelle Washington screaming that he was her brother. All of that was noise, distractions. In Savannah's eyes, she had done exactly what a good cop was trained to do. Neutralize a threat before it escalated, even if that threat was entirely imagined. After submitting the report into the department's system, Savannah made her way to the break room, where a few officers were gathered, sipping burnt coffee and sharing stories from their morning shifts. She strolled in with a swagger, her boots echoing confidently against the linoleum floor. "Well," she said loudly, tossing her gloves onto the table, "first solo arrest. Not bad for a Thursday." Sergeant Owens, a gruff man with 20 years on the force, glanced up from his cup. "Already? What happened?" Savannah didn't wait to be asked twice. She launched into her version of the story, how a suspicious male, loitering outside a convenience store, had ignored commands, how he became belligerent when asked for ID, how she had to step in before things got out of hand. "Guy tried to talk back like he was some kind of lawyer," she said with a scoff. "You know the type, cool shirt, tie. But the minute you give them an order, suddenly they're civil rights experts." A few chuckles rippled around the room. "Handled it by the book, though," she added with just enough pride to make her intentions clear. "Showed him how we do things in the city." She took a sip from the styrofoam cup someone had left behind and leaned casually against the counter. The room seemed relaxed, almost supportive, but not everyone was laughing. Across the room, Sergeant Thompson sat silently, his eyes fixed on her. He'd trained Savannah briefly during her probationary period. He knew she was ambitious. He also knew she had a dangerous blind spot, one that mistook dominance for justice. He didn't say a word, just stared, and she didn't notice. In the office next door, Lieutenant Chen stood at the window, watching the street below, but she was only half focused. She'd seen Savannah's body cam alert pop up in the system, one that should have included footage from the moment she exited her cruiser. Instead, the file was marked as pending upload. A common glitch, maybe, but these glitches were becoming too familiar, and they always seemed to happen at the most convenient moments. Chen walked over to her computer, pulled up Savannah's report, and read it line by line. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the phrases. Subject appeared agitated, non-compliant, erratic behavior. It was textbook language, the kind of phrasing drilled into rookies who wanted to cover their backs. The kind that, in the wrong hands, buried the truth beneath procedure. She closed the file and sighed. In the break room, Savannah was still basking in her fabricated glory. "I mean, honestly," she said, "you let them talk too long, they start thinking they're in charge. Sometimes you just gotta make it clear. Badge beats attitude, every time." It was that sentence, so casual, so smug, that made Thompson finally speak. "You sure about that, Mitchell?" he said quietly. The room went still. Savannah turned, still smiling, but her eyes sharpened. "Sure about what, Sarge?" "That your badge makes you right." She chuckled, trying to brush it off. "I'm sure it makes me the one writing the report. And guess what? That's the only version anyone reads." Thompson stood slowly, picked up his coffee, and walked past her. But as he passed, he murmured just loud enough for her to hear. "Until the cameras start talking." Savannah's smile twitched, just for a second, but no one else said anything. The other officers either looked away or pretended not to have heard. They didn't want trouble. They didn't want to question a fellow cop, especially a rookie who seemed to be rising fast, and so silence settled in. thick, complicit. While Officer Mitchell basked in her fabricated version of heroism, Darnell Washington was trapped in a far harsher reality, cold, forgotten, and marked as a criminal for doing absolutely nothing wrong. The cell was cold, the air dry, and the silence so loud it echoed inside Darnell Washington's skull like a slow, relentless drumbeat. Time had lost meaning. His watch had been taken, his phone confiscated, his name now logged in the city's system alongside petty thieves and violent offenders. No charges had been filed, yet he'd been fingerprinted, photographed, processed like a criminal. No explanation, no apology, just a concrete bench, a flickering fluorescent light, and the choking weight of disbelief. He replayed it all over and over again, waiting for Michelle, handing over his ID, getting cussed at, slammed into the wall, the cuffs, the cameras, the shouting, the humiliation, and now this, a night spent in custody for a crime that didn't exist. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't resisted. He hadn't even raised his voice. And yet the arrest report painted him as belligerent, evasive, possibly dangerous. That single document, crafted with surgical lies, was now a shadow cast over his entire life. Across town, Michelle Washington sat in the corner of her apartment, hands trembling around a mug of untouched tea. Her brother wasn't answering calls, of course not. They'd taken his phone. No updates from the precinct, just stonewalling. She'd watched him be dragged into that patrol car like some threat to public safety when all he'd done was check his phone and wait for her. The guilt gnawed at her ribs like hunger. She was the reason he'd been there. She was the one who'd been late. By 3 a.m., she made the call that would change everything. "Marcus Williams," came the groggy but firm voice on the other end. "Mr. Williams, I need your help. It's my brother. They arrested him, and he didn't do anything. Please, you have to help." Williams had heard this tone before, desperation laced with disbelief. He asked for details, took notes, then said something Michelle didn't expect. "This won't be easy." "He didn't do anything," she repeated, as if that were enough. "I know," Williams said, "but justice doesn't come when it should. It comes when you refuse to stop chasing it." That morning, when Darnell was finally released without explanation, his clothes were wrinkled, his briefcase dented, and his reputation already bleeding. No formal charges, but the damage had begun. By 9 a.m., his supervisor at the accounting firm had already left a voicemail. "Hey, Darnell, we saw something on social media. Not sure what happened, but we need to place you on administrative leave while HR reviews the situation. Hope everything's okay." Social media. The videos had gone viral overnight. One showed the moment he was cuffed. Another caught his calm response seconds before the arrest. But the comments were split. Some believed he was just another man unfairly targeted. Others defended the officer, claiming, "We don't know what happened before the video started." Truth didn't matter. Perception had already gone to trial. At Marcus Williams' office later that afternoon, Darnell sat across from the civil rights attorney, exhausted, defeated, and barely holding it together. "I did everything right," he muttered. "I stayed calm. I gave her my ID. I didn't touch her. I didn't yell." "I believe you," Williams said quietly, sliding a legal pad across the desk. "But the system doesn't care about what you did. It cares about what it can prove. And right now, it's their word against yours unless we fight." Darnell rubbed his hands together. They were still red from the cuffs. "What happens next?" "We start by requesting the body cam footage," Williams replied. "Then we subpoena bystander videos, witness testimonies. We gather every scrap of evidence that proves you weren't a threat. Because the report they filed?" He slid a printed copy across the desk. "They're saying you resisted arrest, that you refused to comply, that you reached for something. And unless we dismantle that narrative piece by piece, they'll bury you." Darnell stared at the page like it was written in another language. This wasn't him. This wasn't his life. But there it was in black and white. A manufactured version of reality, signed by Savannah Mitchell, badge number 8207. Michelle, seated beside him, whispered, "They're not going to get away with this, right?" Williams leaned forward. His voice was low, unwavering. "Only if we stay quiet." Outside, the city carried on as if nothing had happened. Horns blared, Taxis weaved through traffic. Pedestrians checked their phones, oblivious to the injustice unfolding just a few blocks away. But in that modest office, a war had quietly begun. "We're not just going after her," Williams continued. "We're going after the department, the culture, the chain of command that teaches rookies to see threats instead of people. But it won't happen overnight." Darnell's jaw tightened. "Why should I have to wait for justice?" Williams met his eyes. "Because justice always shows up late, but when it arrives, it can bring down the whole damn building." He handed Darnell a pen. "First, we file the official complaint. Then we build a case strong enough to make them sweat. But you have to be ready. They'll fight dirty. They'll discredit you. They'll twist everything. And when that doesn't work, they'll try to silence you." "I'm not backing down," Darnell said, his voice gaining strength. "They want me quiet. They picked the wrong man." Michelle nodded. "We've got the truth. That's our weapon." "No," Williams corrected. "The truth is the foundation. The weapon is what we build on top of it." The first court date would be weeks away. The hearings, the interviews, the public scrutiny, months. But as Darnell signed the documents, something inside him shifted. He was no longer just a man who'd been wrongfully arrested. He was a man preparing to fight back. The case file landed on Judge Marcus Carter's desk at exactly 6:43 a.m. The courthouse was still quiet, the city outside barely waking, but Carter was already seated, coffee untouched, sleeves rolled up, mind sharp. The man didn't need caffeine when injustice was on the line. He flipped open the folder, eyes scanning the front page, State versus Washington, Darnell. Arresting officer Savannah Mitchell. Charge, resisting arrest. His brow furrowed. Another one. He turned to the incident report, reading slowly, deliberately, dissecting each word like a surgeon searching for infection. Subject was non-compliant. Subject escalated the encounter. Officer applied restraint to ensure officer safety. It was textbook language. Too clean, too practiced, too convenient. He leaned back in his chair, tapping the file lightly against his knee. He'd read hundreds of these reports, enough to know when something didn't add up. This one stank. The timeline was too tight, the language too rigid, the escalation too sudden. Savannah Mitchell, according to the report, had detained Darnell Washington based solely on a vague disturbance call. Yet she never described the original complaint in any detail. No mention of verified witnesses, no supplemental statements, and no confirmation from dispatch. Carter's jaw tightened. He pressed the intercom. "Carson," he said to his clerk, "I want everything on this case. Pull the body cam footage, request external surveillance from the scene, and get me Officer Mitchell's full training history." "Yes, Your Honor," the voice replied. He hung up and stared at the manila folder like it had insulted him. "They think I won't see it," he murmured. "They think I'll sign off on another lie." His eyes drifted to the corner of his office, where a framed article hung on the wall, aged yellow now, preserved behind glass. 17-year-old wrongfully jailed, charges dropped after alibi confirmed. Below the headline was a grainy black and white photo, a young boy in handcuffs, eyes wide with disbelief, a bruised lip, torn shirt. It was him, Marcus Carter. He had been 17, walking home from a late school event, when two officers mistook him for a robbery suspect. No evidence, no apology, just assumptions, cuffs, and 3 months in juvenile detention before a janitor's testimony and school surveillance cleared his name. He never forgot the cold of that cell, the way the guards looked through him like he wasn't real, the way his mother's voice cracked when she visited, trying to stay strong while her son's future crumbled. That night, after being released, he swore two things. He would never be powerless again, and he would make damn sure others weren't either. He turned back to the file. Darnell Washington. No criminal record. Employed, professional. Picked up outside a convenience store in broad daylight while waiting for his sister. A weekly lunch tradition, according to the supplemental affidavit. Savannah's report claimed he became verbally aggressive and reached suddenly into his pocket, prompting immediate detainment. But Carter had read enough to know when a report was written to protect, not to inform. And this one reeked of fear disguised as justification. He picked up his pen, writing in firm, deliberate strokes across a fresh legal pad. Timeline inconsistent. Use of force justification unclear. Subject compliance not confirmed. Language suggests narrative shaping. Investigate body cam integrity. Training history of Officer Mitchell. There was no anger in his face, just cold, focused precision. The kind of intensity that had earned him the nickname, the scale, in legal circles. Because in his courtroom, justice wasn't just blind, it was inevitable. He closed the folder and walked over to the window, watching the first rays of sunlight spill across the marble steps of the courthouse. It was peaceful out there, but peace could be deceptive. He knew that better than most. How many times had he seen this play out? A young black man criminalized for simply existing in public space. A rookie officer trying to prove herself. A department too willing to protect its own. A paper trail built to bury the truth. But not in his court, not this time. "You picked the wrong judge," he whispered, eyes still on the horizon. He returned to his desk and flipped through Savannah Mitchell's personnel file. Top of her academy class. Impressive test scores. Minimal field complaints. But a few subtle red flags, comments from trainers noting rigid approach, difficulty accepting feedback, and tends to escalate when challenged. Buried under praise were warnings. The department had chosen to ignore them. There was a knock at the door. Carson entered, holding a small stack of preliminary footage. Body cams still being pulled from cloud storage. "But here's security footage from a nearby cafe and gas station," he said, placing the USB on Carter's desk. Carter nodded. "Good. And the officers' full training logs?" "Being overnighted from River Creek. Should arrive tomorrow." Carter inserted the USB into his monitor. The footage loaded. The timestamp matched the arrest report. He clicked play. There, in grainy but clear resolution, was Darnell Washington, standing, waiting, checking his phone. Calm, still, nothing threatening, nothing illegal. Then a police cruiser pulled up. Savannah stepped out, posture assertive. She approached quickly, words exchanged, no audio. Then her hand went to her belt. Darnell's hands rose. She stepped forward. Moments later, he was against the wall being cuffed. Carter paused the video, zoomed in, rewound, played again. There was no resistance, no sudden movement, no escalation except from the officer. He leaned back, exhaled through his nose and muttered, "She lied." Another innocent life, swallowed whole by fear, power, and paperwork. But this time, it would not go unseen. He opened a fresh folder on his desk, labeled it in bold black ink, "Washington vs. City, Judicial Inquiry." Justice, like the sunrise outside his window, might be slow, but it was rising, and Marcus Carter was wide awake. The courthouse was already packed when Darnell Washington stepped onto the polished marble floor of courtroom 4B. The first hearing. The moment everything would either begin to heal or fall apart completely. Every camera lens seemed to tilt in his direction. Every whisper quieted as he passed. But Darnell didn't flinch. He wore a crisp navy suit, not to impress, but to reclaim his dignity. Beside him stood his sister Michelle, clutching his hand so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Behind them sat his mother Patricia, stoic, proud, terrified. Across the aisle sat Officer Savannah Mitchell. She looked every bit the part-pressed uniform, badge gleaming, hair in a tight regulation bun. But her eyes betrayed her. They shifted, darted, unable to rest in one place. She knew what was coming. She just didn't know when the walls would collapse. At exactly 9 a.m., the bailiff's voice rang through the chamber like a gunshot. "All rise, the Honorable Judge Marcus Carter presiding." The murmurs died. Everyone stood as Judge Carter entered, his black robe trailing behind him like the shadow of justice itself. His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp, surgical, unforgiving. He took his seat, gave a single nod, and said in a voice that brooked no interruption, "Be seated." "Let's begin." The state's attorney gave a brief opening, dry and procedural, reiterating the original justification for the arrest. Officer Mitchell responded to a suspicious activity call. The subject became non-compliant. Standard procedure followed. Then Marcus Williams stood. The room seemed to lean toward him, as if it knew the storm he was about to summon. "Your Honor," he began, voice steady, words crisp. "What happened on Marshall and 4th wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a training error. It was the weaponization of authority. And today we will show without question that Officer Mitchell fabricated key elements of her report to justify an unlawful arrest. He turned, nodding to the bailiff. With the court's permission, we'd like to begin with video evidence. Judge Carter gave a curt nod. Proceed. The lights dimmed. A large screen descended behind the judge's bench. The first video began to play silent at first. Captured from a nearby cafe's security camera, it showed Darnell standing calmly, scrolling on his phone. Back leaned lightly against the convenience store wall. His posture was relaxed, non-threatening. Then the cruiser appeared. Savannah exited, approached, spoke. Darnell looked up, replied. He didn't move aggressively. He didn't raise his voice. His body language was neutral. The screen cut to the second angle from the gas station across the street. This one had audio. My sister works right there, Darnell could be heard saying. We meet every Thursday. Then Savannah's voice, sharper than steel. Hands where I can see them. Confused, Darnell asked, I gave you my ID. Why am I? Step back now. The courtroom was dead silent as the third video played bystander footage. A cell phone, shaky but clear. It captured the moment Savannah forced Darnell's hands behind his back. I'm not resisting, he shouted, panic in his voice. You're being detained for non-compliance, she said coldly. As the lights came back on, Judge Carter sat perfectly still. Williams walked slowly to the center of the courtroom, holding a printed copy of Savannah's report. In her official report, Officer Mitchell claimed Mr. Washington exhibited agitated behavior and reached for an unknown object. Your Honor, you've seen the footage. You've heard his voice. Do those words describe what we just witnessed? Carter didn't reply. Williams turned to Savannah, who now sat visibly tense at the prosecution table. Officer Mitchell, would you care to explain this discrepancy? Her lawyer rose. Objection, this line of questioning presumes guilt. Overruled, Carter said immediately. She will answer. Savannah stood, clearing her throat. In the moment, I believe Mr. Washington's actions were unpredictable. Williams stepped forward. Unpredictable? You mean standing with a phone in his hand? I wasn't sure what he was reaching for, she said, faltering slightly. I had to make a split-second decision. Yet the video shows no sudden movement, Williams pressed. No signs of aggression. So let me ask plainly. Did Mr. Washington resist arrest? Savannah paused. A long beat. No, she whispered. Louder for the record. No, she said again, her voice cracking. He didn't. There was a ripple through the courtroom, shocked gasps, murmurs, and Michelle's stifled sob. Williams took a step closer. And yet you wrote in your report that he did. Why? Savannah looked down. Her face was pale now. Her hands trembled. I didn't want to look like I'd made the wrong call. I thought if I described it as more aggressive, it would justify the arrest. I didn't think it would. She stopped herself, breath catching. You didn't think it would what? Williams asked, voice calm but cutting. I didn't think it would go this far, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I wrote what I thought I had to protect myself. Williams turned to Judge Carter. No further questions, Your Honor. Carter leaned forward slowly, fingers steepled beneath his chin. His voice was low, deliberate. Officer Mitchell, you submitted a sworn report to this court, a document that falsely claimed a citizen resisted arrest. You submitted that report knowing it would affect his legal standing, his career, and his freedom. And now, under oath, you admit that report was intentionally misleading. Savannah nodded, tears streaking her cheeks now. Yes, Your Honor. Then this court will take immediate action. He turned to his clerk. I am ordering an internal audit of all reports filed by Officer Savannah Mitchell during her tenure with the department. Every arrest, every use of force, every body cam clip, effective immediately. He faced the courtroom. This is not just about one arrest. This is about trust. And this courtroom will not become the final stop in a chain of systemic abuse. The gavel struck once. Sharp. Final. The courtroom erupted. Reporters raced for the exits, phones buzzing, keyboards clicking. Patricia broke into tears and Michelle collapsed into her brother's arms. Darnell, meanwhile, just sat there, frozen, breathing heavily, staring at the judge who had, without fanfare, just shattered the lie that almost ruined his life. He had come to court to defend his name, but now justice was chasing the one who tried to destroy it. And this time, it wasn't backing down. The fight for justice is just beginning. More shocking twists are ahead. Don't miss a moment. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay with us. Thank you for standing for truth and justice. Where are you watching from? Let us know. The fallout came faster than anyone expected. Just 72 hours after Savannah Mitchell's confession in Judge Carter's courtroom, a task force from Internal Affairs launched a full-scale review of every arrest she'd made during her 6-month training period. By day 4, the initial findings arrived, and they were damning. 13 cases, 13 arrests flagged for misconduct, 13 people, each one wrongfully detained under Savannah's badge and authority, each one marked by a system that had decided their guilt before they ever had a chance to speak. Judge Carter sat in his chambers, the case files spread across his desk like a graveyard of injustice. Page after page revealed a pattern. Vague probable cause, minimal evidence, excessive use of authority, and always the same language: non-compliant, suspicious, agitated. But the videos told a different story. One by one, Carter reviewed them. A college student pulled from his car for fitting a description. His crime was wearing a hoodie. A mother handcuffed in front of her children after demanding to know why she was being questioned. A teenager thrown to the ground for loitering near a bus stop. It wasn't just about Savannah Mitchell anymore. This wasn't the mistake of one rookie officer. This was a pattern, a culture, a sickness. And Savannah, it turned out, had been trained to spread it. She was suspended without pay, her badge revoked, her access to precinct systems locked. But that wasn't the end. 2 days later, she received a knock on her apartment door. FBI agents stood on the other side, flanked by a federal prosecutor. "Miss Mitchell," the lead agent said, showing his credentials, "we're opening a federal investigation into patterns of civil rights violations within the Metropolitan Police Department. You're a key witness and a subject of interest." Savannah's world stopped. She sat in a windowless conference room hours later, facing 2 agents and a tape recorder. She'd been offered limited immunity only if she cooperated fully. "We have enough evidence to prosecute you," the agent said flatly, "but we believe you were part of something larger, something orchestrated. We want names, dates, how the system works, how rookies are trained to escalate, and who trained you to lie." Her hands shook as she reached for the water bottle. She took a breath, and she started talking. By the end of the week, federal investigators had a clearer picture. There wasn't just a culture of silence inside the department. There was a playbook, a literal training guide, passed verbally from officer to officer, mentor to recruit. Tactics, language, how to write a report that would hold up under scrutiny, how to frame compliance as resistance. Savannah gave them everything. The names of the field officers who taught her how to twist body cam footage with strategic positioning. The sergeant who told her to always include the phrase "furtive movement." The lieutenant who advised her to document only the parts of an incident that justified escalation. The higher-ups had called it assertive policing. But what it really was? A factory for injustice. And now the factory lights were flickering. Judge Carter reconvened his courtroom. Not for Darnell Washington's case that was already closed, but to open the door for the flood that was coming. They called them the others. The victims who had watched Darnell's case unfold and finally saw a path to speak. Jeremy Torres was first. He stood in the witness box, quiet, wiry 19-year-old with a scar above his left eye. "She said I was loitering near a school," he said, voice tight. "I was on my way to my tutoring job. I told her, showed her my ID. She said I was being smart. Next thing I knew, I was face down on the pavement." He lost his job, missed the deadline for his scholarship application, never reapplied. Next came Aisha Reynolds, a single mother, arrested outside a grocery store for disorderly conduct after asking why officers were searching her bag. "I lost my job at the daycare," she said. "They said I brought negative attention. I wasn't convicted, but the arrest stayed on my record. I couldn't get hired again." She paused, tears threatening to spill. "I couldn't afford rent. My son and I lived in my car for 3 months. Then came a pastor, a school nurse, a student athlete. One by one, their voices filled the courtroom with stories that echoed with the same pattern. Stopped, questioned, humiliated, written up as threats when all they had done was exist. Each one had been arrested by Savannah Mitchell or one of her training officers. Each case bore the same DNA, and each case, until now, had been buried under bureaucracy and fear. Savannah Mitchell sat alone in a sterile FBI conference room, the relentless hum of fluorescent lights hammering her ears. She had thought surrendering her badge ended her darkest fears, yet she discovered that was merely the doorway to a deeper abyss. Before her lay a thick folder labeled Multi-State Law Enforcement Corruption Mitchell Interview Materials, filled with documents, pictures, and transcripts. Over 300 victims spanned 15 states, each one subjected to bogus arrests or intimidation. If not for Judge Carter's relentless pursuit of truth, these cases would have stayed buried under shredded evidence in official silence. Now Savannah found herself stripped of her uniform and rank. She was no longer the ambitious officer the Academy once praised, but rather a young woman confronting the monstrous machine she had helped maintain. "Ms. Mitchell," said one of the agents, a man with wire-rimmed glasses, voice like sharpened steel, "please walk us through your recruitment timeline. You stated it began within your first month at the Academy. That correct?" She nodded, breathing unevenly. "They singled me out early," she said, eyes brimming with tears she tried to suppress. "I assumed it was because of my high scores in firearms, my performance in patrol simulations, and your willingness to enforce compliance," the agent interjected. She let out a shaky laugh. "Yes, back then I saw it as a compliment. Now I know better." All morning she had pored over horror stories about people ensnared by the same warped tactics she used on Darnell, Washington. A father missing his child's birth, locked away without cause. A college student losing scholarships after being arrested on false charges. A grandmother humiliated for carrying nothing but groceries. Every page cut deeper into Savannah's conscience, fueling a guilt that threatened to consume her. It was a brutal truth. She was never the heroine she'd imagined. She had become part of a machine fueled by prejudice, intimidation, and cunning. Its framework existed long before she pinned on a badge, and it identified her ambition and rigidity as prime traits for its operation. At the Academy, certain trainers repeated the same dogma: don't question your instincts, never show doubt. If a suspect story threatened your version of events, rewrite reality to fit departmental needs. She soared academically, earning praise for her assertive presence, the instructors proud of her strong performance. But behind each pat on the back was a silent directive: escalate first, justify later. So on the day she unlawfully arrested Darnell, Washington, it felt almost routine, an extension of everything she'd been taught. Now she confronted the scope of that corruption: 300-plus victims in 15 states. Each name was an indictment of the system she served. The agent cleared his throat, drawing her attention back. "Ms. Mitchell, so far we see a pattern of training that goes beyond your city. You mentioned a fast track for proactive policing. Did you realize these tactics violated constitutional rights?" She forced herself to meet his gaze. "Not at first. They taught us criminals will say anything, that if the narrative didn't match standard guidelines, we had ways to fill in the blanks. They never called it lying, but that's what it was." Across town, Judge Marcus Carter presided in a hearing room considerably larger than his usual courtroom. This special session focused on Byron Jacobs, the Metropolitan Police Department's IT director. Jacobs had initially denied all wrongdoing, but evidence revealed that entire server logs were missing, body cam files corrupted, and metadata tampered with. Jacobs took the stand, sweat visible under the harsh lighting. Judge Carter locked him in a gaze that could slice through steel. "Mr. Jacobs," Carter began calmly, "the evidence indicates you deliberately deleted or altered video footage contradictory to official police reports. Do you deny it?" Jacobs swallowed. "No, Your Honor. I followed orders." "From whom?" Carter demanded. "Which individuals authorized you to tamper with crucial evidence?" Jacobs looked ready to collapse in the witness box. "Captains, lieutenants, even a deputy chief. They said the footage would damage ongoing cases or create unwanted scrutiny. I was told to do my part or face consequences." Carter's jaw tightened. "So you knowingly obstructed justice?" Jacobs hung his head. Yes, I understand now I was complicit. I'm sorry. Silence filled the hearing room. Finally, Carter spoke, his voice echoing like a verdict carved in stone. This court will refer your testimony and the supporting evidence for a criminal investigation. Obstruction, conspiracy, civil rights violations. These are not mere words. They define the gravity of your actions. A hush settled. The local department's downfall was accelerating, sweeping along high-ranking officials who struggled to contain the crisis. Rumors spread of hurried resignations, destroyed emails, frantic calls to lawyers. Public trust eroded by the hour. 2 days later, squads of federal marshals surrounded Metropolitan Police Department headquarters, serving warrants and removing boxes of files, seizing computers. It looked more like a crime scene than a law enforcement hub. The institution that once symbolized order and safety now stood stripped of credibility. Meanwhile, a trove of Jacobs's emails revealed the corruption spanned multiple states. Training programs quietly transmitted the same set of manipulative tactics, ensuring new recruits were groomed to see threats where none existed. As soon as they finished training, these officers would relocate, carrying the contamination to new jurisdictions. Official statements tried to downplay it, but the numbers continued to climb. Over 300 documented victims, and more testimonies surfaced daily. Savannah monitored these developments in real time, courtesy of texts and calls from investigators. Each update hammered her guilt. She once thought she was just doing her job, making tough decisions. Now she saw the monstrous apparatus behind those decisions, a hidden pipeline forging officers in fear and false authority. One sleepless night in a drab motel, she wept uncontrollably. She remembered a day at the academy. Her instructor praised her for instantly treating a role-play suspect as hostile. "You have an eye for suspicious behavior," he said. She had beamed with pride, never suspecting they'd been scouting her from day one. She sobbed into a thin pillow, consumed by shame for the lives she'd torn apart. By dawn, she decided to stand fully with the FBI, not just cooperating, but stepping forward to destroy the machine that made her. That morning, she walked into Judge Carter's courtroom as a key witness, the tension palpable. On one side, federal prosecutors. On the other, the city's legal defenders, pale and stiff. The gallery brimmed with reporters, eager for every detail. She took the stand, shoulders rigid, voice trembling with nerves. Carter gazed at her, his expression sober but resolute. "Miss Mitchell," said the lead federal prosecutor, "state your name and former position." She inhaled. "Savannah Mitchell." Formerly Officer Savannah Mitchell of the Metropolitan Police Department. "How long did you serve?" 1 year total, 6 months probationary, 6 months fully sworn. "During that time, were you taught methods that violate standard guidelines? Methods explicitly aimed at escalating encounters and falsifying reports?" Her pulse thumped. "Yes, from the start, we were shown how to phrase everything as a threat, how to label a citizen's question as verbal aggression, how to classify any flinch as resistance. They said never doubt your instincts because a good cop always senses danger." "And how widespread is this practice?" Her tears threatened again. "It spans at least 15 states. Officers transfer and bring these methods with them, training rookies to adopt the same approach. It's huge." The gallery recoiled in silent horror. This was no localized scandal, it was a national crisis unfolding in real time. That same week, multiple high-ranking officials in the Metropolitan Police Department were arrested. Captains and a deputy chief faced charges of conspiracy to violate civil rights and obstruction of justice. The city reeled. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing footage of uniformed officers escorting their own superiors to waiting squad cars. Sirens blared against a chaotic backdrop. City Hall scrambled. The mayor gave a halting press conference, vowing reforms, but it was too late. Public trust had cratered. Citizens marched in protest, outraged at the betrayal. Civil rights organizations demanded sweeping changes, not shallow apologies. Within a small safe house on the edge of town, Savannah watched the carnage on a flickering TV. She saw colleagues, once mentors, handcuffed and shoved into cars. A year earlier, she would have been horrified. Now she felt only numb acceptance. The machine was being dismantled, Piece by rotten piece. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. An FBI agent leaned in, expression solemn. "We have a grand jury hearing tomorrow. They'll want your sworn deposition. Still willing?" She stood, straightening her back. "Yes," she said. "I'll do whatever it takes." She couldn't resurrect the dreams she had crushed, but maybe her testimony would bring justice for those left voiceless. Redemption seemed an impossible goal still. It was worth trying. Judge Carter, meanwhile, observed from his office window as reporters, lawyers, and anxious families crowded the courthouse steps. A mountain of evidence and testimonies lay ahead. This might grow beyond 15 states once more victims realized they could speak. Carter thought back to his own youth, caged for a crime he never committed. That memory fueled his resolve to expose every lie, hold every conspirator accountable, and champion every victim robbed of their dignity. Savannah was both the perpetrator and the witness to something bigger. If more insiders followed her lead, the entire blueprint of deceit could be exposed. Carter knew real reform demanded more than punishing a few scapegoats. It required uprooting the culture that taught cadets to see the world as an endless battlefield. He harbored hope that these revelations might start that vital process. Across the city, protests intensified, some turning confrontational. Citizens vented their fury at a system that endangered them rather than providing safety. Signs and chants called for new leadership, independent oversight, and a drastic overhaul of training programs. On social media, stories poured in. Everyday people recounting interactions with officers who treated them like criminals for standing on the wrong sidewalk, asking the wrong question, or simply existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The sheer weight of these accounts hammered at the department's last fragile defenses, toppling any illusions that the problem was just a few bad apples. The orchard itself was rotten. If a department in one city could quietly train officers to violate rights, what was happening elsewhere? More emails surfaced showing how traveling consultants, retired officers, led seminars on efficient policing, teaching the same manipulative techniques. Rookie after rookie left these seminars with the false belief that suspicion was a virtue. They'd learned to stage body cam angles, produce consistent keywords in their reports, and undermine bystanders' videos as out of context. The result was a tapestry of manufactured truths, now unraveling in spectacular fashion. Savannah saw these revelations each time she opened her phone. She read text after text describing new victims like an avalanche burying any hope of quick resolution. But she forced herself to read them all. Shame was the least she owed. When dawn broke, she arrived at the courthouse basement for the grand jury session. Marcus Williams, representing many of the victims, stood outside. Their eyes met. She braced for contempt, but found only steely composure. "Williams," she whispered, "I'm sorry." His gaze flickered with complicated emotion. "Tell that to the people who lost everything. But first, tell the grand jury everything you know." She nodded, heart pounding. She recalled the first day she met him, back when she was confident Darnell Washington's arrest was justified. Now, all that confidence had shattered. The only thing left was truth. Upstairs, Judge Carter prepared for another day of testimony. He could feel the tide of history shifting under his feet. The old system was cracking, and if enough courageous voices emerged, maybe they could build something better. Savannah understood. Her life as a police officer was finished. Even if she avoided prison, her name was forever tied to corruption. But if speaking out meant preventing another wave of traumatized citizens, she would do it. She'd repeat her story 1,000 times if needed, detailing every secret directive, every quiet hallway conversation that shaped her into the officer who destroyed lives without blinking. She walked into the grand jury chamber, shoulders squared. As the door closed behind her, she inhaled deeply and stood ready to answer every question. She would not lie. She would not omit. She wanted them to see the dark blueprint of a system that fed on fear, the machine that had once claimed her soul. Down the corridor, in a separate room, families of the victims waited anxiously for any news. Some held placards with photographs of loved ones. Others clutched legal documents that had cost them their savings in futile attempts to clear their names. Their collective trauma now found a focused target, the apparatus that Savannah and others like her had embodied. As Savannah was led in for her testimony, she could almost feel the weight of those stares through the walls. Each person out there had a story, a scar, a memory of a night behind bars or a humiliating search on the street. She had once dismissed such tales as rare exceptions, if she even thought of them at all. Now she could not escape them. Each face she imagined gave her the resolve to speak, detail by detail, until the grand jury had no choice but to act. And if the system decided to punish her further, she would accept it. It was, she realized, the only path left that aligned with what was left of her conscience. She was not seeking forgiveness from the world she was seeking to right, in some small measure, the many wrongs she had helped inflict. Perhaps, after all of this, she would find a measure of peace, because once a person recognizes they have become part of the darkness they once believed they were fighting, there is no turning back. The only choice is to shine light on every hidden place. And with that light, maybe some measure of justice, long delayed, would finally be born from the ashes of a broken system. Enough said. The final verdict arrived on a clear morning that felt oddly peaceful. News vans lined the curb outside the courthouse, cameras poised for the outcome they knew would reverberate through the city. Protesters mingled with supporters, each convinced this ruling would transform everything. Inside, tension filled the corridors like a physical force. This was the day Darnell Washington's lawsuit would be decided. He entered the courtroom wearing a simple navy suit, his sister Michelle beside him. She squeezed his hand as they made their way to the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle sat Savannah Mitchell, flanked by her legal counsel. Dark circles underscored her eyes, and the confident posture she once displayed had melted into something bordering on resignation. Darnell felt a pang of sorrow. He remembered how she had once seemed invincible, the embodiment of power. Now she looked like someone who had finally recognized the cost of following a broken system. The bailiff called for order. Judge Marcus Carter appeared, robe billowing behind him. The hush was instant, reverent. He settled behind the bench, surveying the room before placing his hands on a neat stack of documents. After careful deliberation, he began, voice echoing in the silent chamber, this court finds the Metropolitan Police Department liable for the wrongful arrest of Mr. Darnell Washington, as well as the subsequent violations of his civil rights. Accordingly, the city shall provide compensatory and punitive damages. A collective murmur arose. Michelle clutched Darnell's arm, tears shimmering in her eyes. He felt relief surge within, a knot in his stomach unwinding after months of tension. The shackles of doubt had weighed heavily, but finally a court had affirmed that what happened to him was not just unfortunate, it was unlawful. Carter raised a hand, restoring silence. The significance of this verdict extends beyond financial restitution. We have established a pattern of misconduct that harmed not just Mr. Washington, but others as well. This ruling forces a reckoning, one that must catalyze true reform. He paused, turning to Savannah. Miss Mitchell, rise. She stood, trembling hands clasped in front of her. Her gaze flickered with a mixture of guilt and resignation. Carter's tone grew firm. You provided critical testimony exposing systemic corruption, yet you also participated in harmful acts. This court sentences you to 5 years, with 3 suspended, contingent upon full cooperation in a mandatory reform program. You will serve 2 years of incarceration, followed by 3 years supervised release. During that time, you will assist federal oversight committees in dismantling the flawed training that led to these abuses. A faint sob escaped Savannah's lips. She gave a shaky nod. The hush in the courtroom thickened, each person grappling with the gravity of what had transpired. Carter closed the file, exhaling. Justice, he said, isn't about punishment alone. It's about creating change so that no one else endures what Mr. Washington endured. Then his gavel struck. Pandemonium erupted, reporters shouting questions, onlookers bursting into discussion. Darnell stood, Michelle's hand in his, absorbing the surreal scene. He wasn't sure whether to weep or celebrate. He felt exhaustion and triumph coexisting. Outside, a knot of journalists swarmed, microphones thrust at him, cameras flashing. He spoke calmly, offering measured gratitude. It was never just about me, he said. If this ensures others won't suffer the same fate, we've achieved something meaningful. Meanwhile, Savannah was led past, escorted by marshals. Their eyes met briefly. She mouthed a wordless apology. He answered with a nod, acknowledging the complexity of their shared ordeal. How could he hate her fully when she too had been ensnared by a monstrous system? In the days that followed, the city announced sweeping changes: the formation of an independent oversight board, mandatory body cam protocols, and rigorous transparency standards. Some citizens scoffed, calling it a political gesture. Others saw it as a watershed moment. Darnell watched from a distance, hopeful yet cautious. Reform meant more than fancy statements. It demanded tangible shifts in culture and accountability. Marcus Williams, his tenacious attorney, confirmed the settlement. The amount was substantial, but Darnell felt a hollow pang. Money alone couldn't erase the memory of being handcuffed, nor could it restore the faith he'd lost. He resolved to direct much of it toward organizations combating wrongful arrests and providing legal aid. Michelle admired his dedication. She had stood by him through every legal hurdle, comforting him on sleepless nights when nightmares replayed the scene of his arrest. Now she became his ally in forging something good out of the storm. They set up a small foundation, awarding grants to those with stories similar to Darnell's people, whose lives were upended by questionable policing. Yet life had to go on. One Thursday, they decided to reclaim their lunch tradition. Instead of returning to the convenience store corner, they picked a cozy cafe with large windows that let in natural light. The difference was stark. No sirens, no suspicious glares. They sat together, grateful for the simple act of ordering food without fear. As they waited, Michelle studied him. "You look lighter," she observed softly. He smiled. "I feel lighter. It's strange I'm still processing everything, but at least the weight of proving my innocence is gone." She nodded, remembering all the times he'd insisted on telling people his side, only to be dismissed. Now a judge had validated his story. That counted for something. Their sandwiches arrived. They ate slowly, punctuating bites with quiet jokes and comfortable silence. The last time they tried to share lunch, his life had been torn apart. Today they savored the freedom to exist peacefully. Stepping outside afterward, they found themselves reluctant to part ways. They wandered a nearby park, watching families picnic and children play. Life went on, oblivious to the battles that had raged for months. Darnell felt a tear slip down his cheek, part relief, part mourning for the innocence he once had. Later that evening, he sat in his living room, flipping through messages from strangers who had followed his case. Many were supportive, thanking him for paving the way for future lawsuits. A few were hostile, blaming him for tarnishing the department's reputation. He shook his head. Institutions that hid wrongdoing were responsible for their own downfall, not the victims who exposed it. Meanwhile, in a guarded facility, Savannah began the first weeks of her term. She had no illusions that she'd be forgiven or lauded. She had chosen, at least, to lay bare the twisted indoctrination that shaped her policing methods. Reports emerged that she spent hours dissecting training manuals with reform experts, pointing out subtle cues that nudged new officers toward aggression. Even behind bars, she had a job to do if she wanted to make amends. Judge Carter oversaw additional hearings as more victims stepped forward. The revelations seemed endless. Darnell tried to attend when possible, lending moral support. Each new testimony felt like another layer of the city's ugly secret peeled back. Yet each story validated his own, reassuring him that he wasn't alone or exceptional. He was part of a chorus that had been silenced for too long. A month later, the newly formed Oversight Board held its inaugural meeting. Members included community leaders, retired judges, civilian activists, and even a few forward-thinking officers. Darnell was invited to speak. Nervous, he recalled how the system nearly crushed him. He spoke honestly, describing the casual terror of realizing your truth means nothing when someone in uniform decides otherwise. He concluded by urging them not to let bureaucratic inertia dull the sincerity of their mission. The board members offered thanks, some with tears in their eyes. He left the meeting more hopeful than before, sensing that real changes were in motion. Walking home, he felt the sun's warmth on his face, a reminder that the simplest pleasures still held magic after all the darkness. Soon, Michelle texted him with good news. Their foundation had approved its first grant to help a single mother who'd been fired after a wrongful arrest. He grinned at his phone, tears welling again. Finally, he was in a position to give hope instead of pled for it. He kept busy. Some days he joined panel discussions or gave interviews. Others, he simply tried to live. He read novels, reconnected with old friends, even took up jogging to clear his head. Though the city still buzzed with controversy, he discovered that calm moments felt sweeter for having once been stolen from him. One Thursday, they tried a new cafe. The server recognized Darnell from the news and quietly thanked him for what he'd done. It felt surreal, but also uplifting, like the city itself was gradually healing. Over lunch, Michelle and he mapped out a potential scholarship in honor of those who lost educational opportunities due to bogus charges. Each new idea fueled his belief that their fight could blossom into something bigger than a single lawsuit. That night, as he scrolled through social media, he noticed a swirl of debate about Savannah's program. Some argued she deserved harsher punishment. Others believed her forced cooperation was a critical piece of dismantling the old policing model. Darnell mulled it over, concluding that if her knowledge saved even one innocent person from handcuffs, it served a purpose. He never wanted revenge anyway, only justice. Meanwhile, a local TV station ran a profile on the new oversight measures. Footage showed police cadets practicing de-escalation techniques with community volunteers. It felt revolutionary, if also overdue. Darnell recognized a face or two officers who once mocked soft policing. Now they had no choice but to adapt. In a short interview, a training officer admitted that things have changed and we must change too. Encouraging words, yet time would tell. Michelle found him watching the segment. She stepped behind him, resting a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Small steps," she murmured. He sighed. "Yeah, but at least they're steps in the right direction." She nodded. "Hey, we forgot to plan tomorrow's lunch." He smiled. "We'll find another cafe. Maybe the one by the river?" Her eyes lit up. "Perfect. I hear they have great soup." So they continued forging small rituals to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Each meal, each stroll, each quiet joke was a testament to their resilience. When he thought about that day he'd been arrested, a shudder sometimes ran through him. But it passed, replaced by the knowledge that he had turned pain into progress. He kept up with therapy too, recognizing that trauma doesn't vanish just because a judge says you're vindicated. Late at night, images of that patrol car sometimes flickered in his dreams, but each time, he reminded himself that he was now free. A faulty system had tried to label him a criminal, and it failed. As the weeks turned into months, the city became something almost unrecognizable from the place it was before. Investigative journalists uncovered deeper layers of abuse, prompting more resignations. The department's upper echelons saw a wave of retirements and fresh leadership emerge. Some decried it as a purge. Others embraced it as necessary renewal. Darnell watched with cautious optimism. One day a package arrived at his door. Inside was a framed letter from a young woman in another state. She wrote that she'd followed his case online, drawing courage to file her own lawsuit after an unjust arrest. "You showed me that the truth can prevail," the letter read. Tears pricked at Darnell's eyes as he read. He set it on his shelf, a reminder that each voice can inspire another. He and Michelle hosted a small gathering in their mother's house to celebrate the steps forward, like the foundation grants and local reforms. A few of the recipients came, telling their stories over hot coffee and pastries. Laughter filled the air, though tinged with sadness for what each had suffered. The sense of community, however, was undeniable. They were forging new bonds from the rubble of injustice. Meanwhile, Savannah's progress updates trickled through official channels. She was helping rewrite entire sections of police manuals, identifying key phrases that instructors once used to rationalize bias. Some said it was too little, too late. Others insisted it was crucial to peel back the curtain on how prejudice got institutionalized. Darnell, for his part, believed in the value of truth from any source willing to speak. He had seen enough to know that silence was the real enemy. Eventually, the uproar faded from front-page headlines, replaced by new crises. But that didn't erase the deeper changes stirring. Civilian review boards continued their work. Body cam oversight became the norm, and Darnell's face occasionally popped up in local coverage of activism events. Though he still recoiled a bit at the spotlight, he accepted that it was part of staying vigilant. On another bright Thursday, He and Michelle found themselves exploring a lunch spot near the museum district. They ordered, laughed about small things, and marveled at how ordinary the day felt. Halfway through the meal, Michelle raised her glass of iced tea. "To us," she said softly, "and to everyone who dared to speak up." He clinked his water glass against hers. "Here, here." They drank, letting the noise of city life swirl around them. It was a perfect slice of normalcy, the kind he once feared he'd never reclaim. The memory of that day outside the store might never fully vanish, but it no longer controlled him. Finally, as they wrapped up, Michelle insisted on paying. "Besides," she teased, "the city gave you that giant check. You can spare me the lunch bill at least once." He snorted a laugh. "I'm pretty sure I've donated most of it by now." She gave a mock pout, and they both grinned. If this story moved you, if it stirred anger, hope, or determination, please like, subscribe, and share. Each voice raised against injustice strengthens the chances for real change. Let's ensure no one else faces what Darnell endured, and let's keep shining light into places once hidden in the dark.